Hello and welcome to the first of our virtual testing series. I can see a few familiar names on here, but for those of you that don't know me, I'm Josh. I'm a lead consultant specialising in permanent QA and software testing here at IO, joined by my colleague Max, who specialises in contracts, security cleared and DV cleared software testing here at IO Associates. So here at IO, we're a tech, digital and engineering recruitment specialist organisation. We've always been actively involved in multiple meetup groups across the UK, whether that be organising, sponsoring or attending. We wanted to make sure that we're continuing to support the community. So we hope that this is going to be the first of many. If anybody does have any ideas for topics, or if you'd like to speak, please do get in touch. I'll now be handing over to our guest speaker, Simon, who'll give an introduction to himself and his talk on sustainable software testing. And just as a few housekeeping rules, please can I ask that if everybody can please keep themselves on mute whilst Simon's giving the talk. We will be running a Q&A at the end for any questions that you guys might have. So now, over to you, Simon.
Thanks, Josh. Good to be here, but just like to say welcome to everybody. Thanks to IO Associates for giving us this opportunity to talk about sustainability in software testing. It's an important topic. It's one that's going to get more important as the years go on, and I think it's something that all testers really need to at least think about going forwards. Now I'll share my screen if I can get this right. Hopefully you will be able to see my screen shortly. Which screen are you seeing? The wrong one, I bet. Which screen are you seeing? The preview or the...
We can see the IO Associates testing series, sustainable software testing.
Just the slide?
Just the slide, yeah. And
if I change it, there's me. Yeah, super. Right, thank you very much. Always good to get to grips with the technology. So brief introduction to myself. My name's Simon Frankish. I've worked in software testing for over 33 years now. Done pretty much everything in my time in testing, from in-house test teams to test consultancy, everything from test analyst through to head of testing, consultancy roles, etc., etc. Really enjoy working in testing. Really enjoyed seeing the changes in it over the years. Really enjoyed seeing how testing has become a really recognised profession over the years, and it really wasn't at times when I first started. So that's great. I currently work for an organisation called Experimentus. We're the world's leading supplier of test process improvement through TMMi. And TMMi, for those that don't know, is the world's leading test process improvement framework. And we use that largely to help people improve their test processes. Of late, I and Experimentus as a whole have become much more interested in sustainability and green issues within testing, largely through work we've been doing with some clients. So we're working with a number of major banks who are really interested in this topic, and they're working with us to look at the issues and look at the ways we can do things around this topic. I'm also a TMMi Foundation accredited lead assessor, and I lead the UK local chapter for TMMi. Just a quick agenda. So the things we're going to look at, just to set a bit of context, we'll talk very quickly about ESG, environmental, social governance aspects. We'll look at why this is important. What's the problem? What's the issue with sustainability in software testing? And then we'll look at a number of topics around how we believe we can start to address the problem. And we've split that into 4 areas: test process, test environments, housekeeping, and measurement, and there are a number of different areas in each of those that we'll just cover fairly briefly. We'll look at the challenges and we'll try and draw some conclusions, and then we'll look at a sustainable software testing survey which we've developed, which people can use to measure their own sustainability in their software testing. And finally, we'll talk about what next steps may be in this area. So we'll talk very briefly here environmental, social, corporate governance. So a lot of people talk about this nowadays. This is something which all organizations, all corporations are looking at and need to demonstrate that they're doing something in these areas. Obviously, what we're talking about today is a relatively small part of this. So we're really only looking at aspects of the environmental leg there, for want of a better word, and really the energy efficiency, carbon intensity, and potentially environmental management. So what we're looking at can be seen in a much wider scope, but it is actually, we're looking at scope 1, energy efficiency, carbon intensity, in this case. But if you hear people talking about ESG, this really feeds into that, and it is something that people can think about on their own. So what's the problem? There's just some statistics here from Go Code Green. They've done some research and come up with a number of conclusions, and I think some of these are really quite interesting. Some of them are really quite eye-opening, or certainly were to me when I first saw them. So things like, I won't read all of these out, I'm sure you can all read, but things like the emissions that we use in information and communication technology are greater than those in the aviation industry. So there's an awful lot of talk nowadays about people flying to places. Is that good? Is that good for the environment? What's that doing to the environment? Actually, you know, the amount of energy consumed within the information and communication technology industry is higher than that, and the growth rate is quite eye-opening. So growing at 9%, so at that rate you're going up to enormous figures within the next 5 to 10 years or so. So it's really important that this is, you know, this is a real problem. This is a real issue. This is a real thing that people need to do something about. And just looking at some of the information on these screens just helps emphasize that. And in terms of, you know, specifics, so, you know, Spotify, streaming a song on Spotify. I don't know that song that's used as the example. I must be too old. Driver's License by Olivia Rodrigo. 4,100 tons of CO2 just through streaming service usage. So yeah, Bitcoin again uses massive amounts of CO2 in a year, and then using some AI stuff again, massive amounts. So there is a real issue here. This is not a minor thing. I said that we're doing a small amount of this, but actually everybody can help in their own small way, and it all adds up. So to address the problem, how do we introduce sustainable practices into our software testing? Firstly, something we don't do. We don't compromise quality. So why would we stop testing? The best way of not utilizing energy when we're testing is just don't do any testing. But obviously that's not an option. We need to maintain the quality of the products we're delivering. We need to maintain the quality of the products that get delivered at the end of the testing cycle. So doing no testing is not really an option. So we don't compromise quality. A lot of what you'll hear today won't be ever so new to you. There's a lot of things that we talk about with regard to sustainability in software testing that have been around for an awfully long time. They just become much more relevant when we look at them through the carbon lens as to how are we looking at these things and how do they contribute towards better, more sustainable, greener testing practices. So, you know, don't expect earth-shattering revelations necessarily, but it's just about getting to think about things that we probably should be doing anyway, but how they actually contribute towards more sustainable testing practices. When you're looking at this from your test team's perspective, accept that there will be things that are out of your control. So we can't, as a test team, control everything to do with sustainability issues, but we can look to affect the areas that we do have control over, and we'll come on to what they are later. If there are things that are out of our control, so for example, things that people say to us are, you know, we as a test team, we have no control over where we source our electricity from. So are we sourcing our electricity from a green source, or are we sourcing it from carbon fuel? Quite often we'll say we don't have that. You know, people will say we just can't influence that. But what you can do potentially is make it visible. So perhaps by looking at some measurements, perhaps by talking with your peers in other areas, you can actually make that more visible and start to maybe change people's minds around that. But the important thing really here is to affect the areas that you do have control over, because that's where you make the most direct difference and where people will get the most value within the testing arena. And finally, some of this can be really simple. It doesn't have to be rocket science. It doesn't have to be complicated. I'm sure a lot of you will have thought of a lot of this already. We're not out to make things difficult. We've got there's no value in us to make this seem more difficult than it actually is. It's actually really, a lot of this is really simple. There are some practices within testing that to make your testing more efficient that, you know, are a little bit more difficult to implement or take a little bit more thought. But a lot of this you'll think, well, yeah, obviously, but that's fine. That's fine as long as people go away from here thinking about that and hopefully thinking about you know, the way that they can apply some of these principles in their own businesses when you go back to work. So we'll look at test process. As we said, we're going to look at test process, we're going to look at test environments, we're going to look at housekeeping, and we're going to look at measurement. The first one is test process. So what elements of an effective set of test processes? So remember, we can't compromise quality, they still need to be effective. So what elements of an effective set of test processes can contribute more towards sustainable testing? And we're just going to ask a number of questions here and hopefully understand how people can think about this. So are there objectives around sustainability in place for your organization as a whole that are potentially then reflected in your test functions objectives? So when you look at your organization, do they have stated objectives to reduce carbon footprint? Anything along the sustainability green lines? And if so, what as a test function or maybe as an IT function, how are those objectives being devolved down into the way you work and what you do and what you look at in order to make that happen? If there's nothing in place at an organizational level, perhaps it's more difficult for the testing team on their own or the IT team on their own to look at that themselves. So we'd ask the question, you know, is this something that's important to your organization? Are they setting business-wide objectives around this? Really important one, and obviously risk-based testing. I think probably most people would expect this to come up. So we speak about only doing the testing that you need to do. And risk-based testing really helps that, but also helps with the not compromising quality, because obviously once you start implementing a proper risk-based testing process, you're not doing too much testing, but also you're ensuring that you're not doing too little testing either. So you're maintaining that quality, but also maintaining that element of trying to ensure efficiency of your testing. I'll give you a very brief example of this. We worked with a bank some time ago, who every time they tested anything around their core business project, tested everything to death. They'd been doing it for years and they were terrified that this would fail, and they tested everything to death. We worked with them to implement risk-based testing, and they saved many thousands of pounds a year. If we look at that the way we're looking at things today, not only did they save many thousands of pounds a year, they also saved an awful lot of carbon emissions, because they were doing effectively less testing, but still maintaining the same quality of the product at the end. So this risk-based testing is really key, I think, to this. And most people will have some elements of risk-based testing in place, but really look at it and understand how it can help you make your testing more efficient. So look at, are you effectively testing your prioritizing your tests? And are you then using that prioritization to say, we don't need to run some of these tests, which is entirely possible. And as you're testing, are you measuring the mitigation of those risks? Because if you get to a point where you believe you've actually mitigated all the identified risk, why keep testing? But that's what people do. They'll just keep testing because the test cases are there. So this is really kind of key to me in terms of ensuring that you don't carry out too much testing. Kind of linked to the first one here. So is there clear ownership of the testing process? So if you're identifying ways of testing which can make you more efficient, if you're identifying ways of testing which can help with sustainability, is there clear ownership of the test process that can then go ahead and implement and impose that new way of working? If there isn't, and these things are only being implemented in pockets or by individual teams across a whole organization, that there's a danger there that you're not going to get the whole benefit in sustainability issues that you would like to get, obviously. So it's really quite important that people have clear ownership of the testing process so that any identified issues can be fixed and any identified improvements can be effectively shared across the whole organization. And our testers' roles clearly defined. So again, nowadays it's not necessarily testers, it's people carrying out testing, but are the roles of the people carrying out testing clearly defined? And does that include their responsibilities towards the green issues, towards sustainability of testing? So if these things are actually written down in people's role descriptions, if these form potentially part of people's objectives, which goes towards pay rises, bonuses, etc., that's a great incentive often. And people should be looking at this. If it's part of your job and it's clearly defined as part of your job, I think people are much more likely to take these kind of elements on board. And consistency. So we look at a consistent set of implemented test processes. Consistency is important from an efficiency perspective, because if you know you're doing the right thing all the time, it's far easier to make changes to work towards a more efficient way of testing that will really help with your sustainability goals. So rather than a free-for-all, we look for some consistency around the test processes that we think really helps people to think about what they're doing in sustainability issues. Obviously, as I said earlier, I think you've probably seen most of these before. You've probably thought about most of these before. What we're saying here is look at them through that carbon lens. Look at them and understand not only are they good practice, but they actually also help with any green testing considerations. There's more in test process, obviously. So we spoke about being able to implement new and improved ways of working that improve efficiency, so therefore help the way that you go through things. I would say, obviously, lessons learned sessions, retrospectives are really quite key in achieving some of these. And if you're not already doing so, are you actively calling out efficiency gains, sustainability considerations in your retrospectives and lessons learned sessions? People will often go through the lessons learned sessions and say, yeah, we found all the bugs. People may not say we found all the bugs, but we could have stopped testing 3 days earlier. It's just maybe another way of looking at it, but carry out those retrospectives, carry out those lessons learned sessions, and make sure people are contributing with that mindset as well. Is there a test plan implemented that reflects and enforces the defined processes? So we've spoken a lot about people making sure you've got the right consistent process in place, making sure that you're following good risk-based testing principles, all of making sure you're doing the lessons learned retrospectives. That's much more likely to actually happen if there is somebody who's responsible for running the test plan. Now, that doesn't have to be, the old-fashioned big Word document test plan, but it does imply that somebody somewhere is directing the testing, the way that testing is carried out within the team or within the project that you're working on, and making sure that all that good stuff that you're trying to put in place up front around sustainability actually happens, and happens in a way that contributes towards the overall objectives of the test team and the organization as a whole. Static testing, really important in terms of ensuring that you get efficiency within your testing. So have you got really good static testing in place? If you're finding potential defects when you're reviewing user requirements, when you're reviewing user stories, obviously you don't need to find those while you're testing, doing your dynamic testing. So that's really important. And taking it another step further is making sure that your static testing is actually integrated with your dynamic testing. So look at how your static testing might inform how much dynamic testing you need to do. So you might take a look at your user story reviews, etc., and say, actually, they're really good. There's very few issues with them. They're all very clearly written. There's very few ambiguities. We're really happy with those. And you might look at your risk-based testing approach in that place at that time and downgrade some of the risks because you're really comfortable with the way that's happened. And it may be that the opposite is true. You may have to do more dynamic testing if you look at your user story reviews and say, I don't think that's great. But at least you're having that conversation, you're understanding what you're going to test, and you're looking for efficiencies within your testing based on knowledge about the product quality that you've gained from your static testing. And that leads into the product quality. So measure your product quality as you're testing. And as I say, change the test approach based on its findings. So if you measure the product quality, if you find that you're finding very few defects, which is a really simple product quality measure, you can start thinking about, do we need to do quite as much testing? Can we point the testing in the areas where actually finding defects and not do so much in the places where we're just not finding defects? There's all kinds of ways of looking at your product quality measurements and making sure that you feed them into making your testing more efficient and more effective. Look at root cause analysis. So again, lessons learned and retrospectives are great, but also do a bit of a deeper dive into a selection of the defects that you find, with a view to putting measures in place which stop them happening again in the future. So you look at things like, are we finding defects that are happening because we've got an issue in the way our requirements are written? Have we got issues in the way our environments are working? There are a number of reasons why you do this root cause analysis, but it's important, that the cheapest defect to fix is one that doesn't happen at all. And as well as cost, there's also the cheapest defect to test is one that doesn't happen at all. You're not retesting, etc., etc. So really important, I think, to look at root cause analysis, look at defect prevention, and make sure you've got the adequate measures in place to make that happen. And are you looking at new ways of working and any new tools to improve your testing, particularly in a sustainable way? So new ways of working might be new process, beefing up your risk-based testing approach, beefing up your static testing approach, etc., etc. And they're all great ways of making your testing more efficient and therefore becoming greener. But tools is important as well. So people look at tools and people look at return on investment in tools all the time. If we implement this automation, what's our return on investment on that? How much quicker can we do testing? How many more tests will we get through in a day, etc., etc. And they're all great ways of looking at things. But actually, maybe also look at, is this tool, does it make us more efficient and make us more sustainable? Is it actually better in terms of running costs from an environmental perspective than one of the old tools we've got? And if so, why not use that if it gives you the same benefits as the other one? So there's just ways of looking at things which people are already doing. I know people are looking at new process and people are looking at new tools all the time, but maybe just, look at it through that carbon lens again and look at it in that way. And have you got test assets that can be reused? So, regression test suites, for example, are a great example. Why utilize machine resources to sit there and rewrite tests that you've already got? Okay, so that's relatively important. Maybe butts up against something we'll talk about when we get to housekeeping, but you need to get that balance there. So test process is, I think what it's about for us in test process in terms of sustainability is balancing the effectiveness of the testing with the efficiency of the testing and getting that sweet spot where you're happy that you're getting the quality of testing you need, but that you're also not over testing, you're minimizing your resource usage in terms of writing and running tests at that point. Obviously, when we talk about sustainability, test environments is a really key area. And again, this is one of those areas where I think everyone's thinking about this, but again, think about it from the green perspective. Is your test environment infrastructure virtualized where possible? That can be a great way of making sure that you're not overusing resources in your test environments. Similarly, are you making effective use of test stubs and service virtualization? You don't necessarily need a full end-to-end test environment available all the time. It's really important to think about that. And again, balance it against quality of testing. Is the idle time for your test environments minimized? So do you have lots of test environments sat there doing nothing for hours or days or weeks on end? I know we see, or not, maybe not so much now, but we used to see an awful lot of people with an awful lot of test environments that just sat there forever. And some were hardly used. We did some work with a bank recently who were telling us that they went out to their projects and said, how much do you need your test environments? And lots of the projects came back and said, we need them 24/7. We can't possibly do without them. But when they actually did some investigation and some analysis of test environment usage, they were using them 6-8 hours a day at most, and not at all at the weekends, etc., etc. So look at test environment usage in terms of that, and obviously infrastructure virtualization can help with that. Where you've got test tools and shared infrastructure, make sure that it's actually shared efficiently. So does everybody need their own instance of that test management tool? Does everybody need their own instance of that test automation tool? Does everybody need their own instance of that infrastructure? Again, just make sure that people are looking at this. And again, this is stuff people do look at. Test environment experts look at this because it's important to them in terms of understanding how they can best use test environments. But are they always looking at it from the green perspective? Not necessarily, but they can do should they wish. And minimize your network traffic. So again, every time you're utilizing the network, you're utilizing resources. Do you need to send all that information across the network? Again, could come back to stubs and surface virtualization, but minimize that. And finally, I think, are the test environments made available in a timely manner? So we don't want people waiting for test environments because that's a waste of resources while people are waiting. And we don't want test environments to be wrong because there's a waste of resources in investigating and fixing that test environment. So make sure that test environments are properly specified in advance, made available in a timely manner, and that people then carry out the smoke/intake tests necessary to make sure that it's a good test environment for what they're doing. So yeah, test environments, there's a lot there, and there's an awful lot more that could be said around test environments, I think. But there's the key points to look at. Housekeeping. So this is some stuff that really is relatively simple. As we said, is green testing a stated objective of your team? And are the people involved aware of what that means? So we've talked about some of that already. but it's really easy, I think, to just say to people, we're trying to minimize our resource usage. It's really straightforward. Are redundant files, things like scripts, results data, log files, etc., tidied down regularly? And this is where I said this may butt up against the, are you keeping reusable test assets? So you need to get that balancing act right. But there are certainly, and we see it all the time, there are certainly many instances of people keeping log files, people taking screenshots at every step of every test they take and then storing them away and keeping them for years and years. That's really not necessary. Some of it's necessary, I know, for audit purposes within certain industries, but a lot of the time there's a lot of stuff that's just kept for no reason. So it should be relatively straightforward to get into a good set of working practices where you don't do that, where you do get rid of stuff as and when you can. Do you free up machines and technology at your earliest opportunity? So once you've finished using a resource, once you've finished using a piece of technology, are you assiduous in then saying, right, I've finished with it now, I can log out, I can make it available for somebody else to use? Because you may well find, and we see this a lot, people have multiple licenses for various things, and they don't need so many if people were just assiduous in freeing up things as and when they can. And really simply, are machines powered off when not in use? I must admit I'm dreadful for this, and I'm trying to think about it much more, but we finish work at the end of the day, either in the office or at home, and do we always turn everything off when we leave? I know I often leave my laptop on for days at a time, and why? And it's just me, but multiply that by the number of people working in IT, the number of people working in testing, and it all adds up. It all adds up. And travel. So again, of course, we're in an era, particularly post-pandemic, where lots of people work from home, where Zoom is king, where Teams meetings are king. Do you need to travel necessarily? You may need to travel. Obviously that we can't get away from that altogether, and often face-to-face is the best way of doing some things. But do you need to do that every week? Can you do that every 2 weeks instead of every week, etc., etc.? Really simple thinking. Just think about, is that something that you can look at and you can make improvements in? The final topic within this is really measurement. So I think the first thing to say here is measurement in this area can be really difficult. It's really difficult often to absolutely objectively quantify your carbon usage for a lot of people. So things to think about. So if you're not directly measuring your carbon impact, are you measuring your software quality and efficiency, so that you can at least see how efficient your software testing process is, and you can make improvements of that. Similarly, are you measuring efficiency of your test environment usage? So lots of people don't, but we are increasingly seeing people looking at what percentage of usage they're getting from their test environments. And you can actually get to over, we've seen organizations, we've helped organizations actually get to over 100%, where they can actually share test environments without there being any conflict of interest there. It's not always possible, but it can be possible. Can you objectively measure your team's environmental impact? And this is the one that's really difficult. Often the answer's not with any degree of accuracy, not with any degree of confidence at the moment, although things are happening around that. But can you do that? And if you can't, can you measure your team's environmental impact in a relative way? So can you say, I believe that my team's environmental impact now is better than it was 3 months ago? And if you can say that, that's great. And if you can't, work out why and keep trying. But it's a measurement that's worth doing, I think. And does your organization, so again, this goes back to the organization at a top level having goals in place for sustainability. So does the organization provide sustainability measures that your test team's measures can feed into. And if they do, that can often help, because if you're taking that top-down approach, there's often a lot more capability to measure some of these things at the top levels than there is here. So the challenges, I think there are significant challenges for us all. Lots of people, are used to working in particular ways. Lots of people are used to having test environments available 24/7, etc. There's all kinds of examples, and there has to be some changes in the way we think almost around that. So think about what that means, in your organization. Are you seeing that coming from the top down? So are your senior managers saying, this is what we want to do, this is what we need to do? And what can you and your team and your individuals and you yourself do? Have a think about what you yourself can do. As we said, the carbon savings can be really difficult to quantify, but it is possible. As an example, we're working with NatWest at the moment, who are taking this really seriously. If there's anybody from NatWest on the call, I'm sure you'll know this. So they're taking this really seriously from the real top down. So I've been into the office in London, one of the big NatWest offices in London, and in the reception there, they've got all kinds of metrics being displayed on carbon usage, and how much they're saving through taking some of these really quite simple measures. We're working with one of their senior test people, who's very, very keen to make strides in this area, and we've jointly presented with him on a number of occasions, and so it's something that some of the really big organizations are taking seriously, and if they're taking it seriously at the top level, you can start to come up with those more objective measures, but it is difficult. And think about the impact on your own project. Everybody's project's different. There is no single set of measures that you can take which will be equally applicable to every single project, depending on what you're working on. You may be working on something which your risk-based testing actually says we need to do lots and lots of testing, and we do need to have a test environment available 24/7. And if that's the case, fine, because we can't compromise quality. But I don't think that's the case for everybody, or even many people, to be honest. Where should we start? Just talk a little bit about a sustainable software testing survey. So this is something we've put together, which talks about those 4 areas we've just looked at and asks questions in each of those areas, and provides a score for each area. So you see the process, environments, housekeeping, measurement scores. It can be done at any level. So you can do it for your project, you can do it at an organizational level, the program level, whatever makes sense to answer questions on. And what we're trying to do with this is give people a way of setting a baseline as one of those relative measures. So you can go away, you can look at that, and you can work out, this is where we are now. So I think this is where I was saying that you can fill in this survey now. You can then work with your team to maybe do things slightly differently, or look at some of the things you're doing, do the survey again in 3 months' time, 6 months' time, whatever, and see where you stand there. And hopefully you'll see improvements in those scores. So you'll see an improvement in the overall score and in the scores for each of those 4 areas. It can actually, if you can't answer some of the questions, actually that's not necessarily a bad thing, because I think that shows you that you've got a piece of information missing somewhere. So again, the fact that you can't necessarily answer a question is probably indicative of something within your organization. So that's a really nice way of looking at this. The other thing we've been doing alongside this is working with a number of representatives from various banks, and they've just actually set up the Greener Software Testing Community page on LinkedIn. So we're involved, and a number of banks are involved, and it's an open page whereby people can exchange information and ideas and have frank and honest discussions about the greener software testing aspects of the way we work. So I'll leave you with this. There's the survey. You can use that QR code to access the survey, and you will get a report back if you complete that survey. Please feel free to do so. And there's the greener software testing community page on LinkedIn. We've got guys and girls from NatWest, Lloyd's, and other organisations involved in there. It's relatively new at the moment, but it will grow. And I'd encourage you all just to take a look and have a think about whether there's information you can share that would help us. And not bad timing, 7:15. Any questions, comments, etc.?
There was one in the chat.
I have a question. Oh,
No,
go
no.
on, sorry.
I think it was just one in the chat earlier. I'm not sure if you saw it, Simon, but it was about how can each person encourage the wider team to see this as a priority and change their practices?
Yeah, it's an interesting question, and it's really difficult because at the end of the day, we're all individuals, and some people will take this on board more than others. I think, as I said, if we've got that top-down pressure, so if your organisation as a whole is setting those high-level objectives around this area, I think that helps. I think, as I said, if people have it written into job descriptions that they have some responsibilities in the area, I think that helps. That's kind of the stick. But I think as the carrot, it's about if you're really interested in this, if this is something that you feel is important, and I hope most people do, just sitting down and having honest discussions with people about it. Yeah, a bit evangelical almost. But ultimately, there will be some people who will never buy into this, and I'm afraid there's probably not a lot you can do about that.
Sorry, so my question, I might have missed it at the start because I joined it a bit later on. I'm not a technical person myself, but I sit on a sustainability council for my organisation. What, other than sort of sharing licenses, are there any other financial or other benefits that obviously aren't to do with sustainability, even though it is also helping that?
Yeah, I think, as I said, so I'm not sure when you came in, sorry, Francesca, so I'm not quite what you heard, but I think for me, as I said at the start, a lot of what I've discussed around the efficiency of your test process is all common sense stuff that people should be doing. They can do it purely for financial reasons. So as I said, I gave an example of we helped a bank improve their risk-based testing, and they saved an awful lot of money through not testing everything to death. So that was good. But actually, we didn't think about it at the time because this was a good few years ago. They were also saving a lot of resource in terms of the sustainability side of things. So I think if you want to get people interested in terms of return on investment, major on some of the test environment stuff, because running test environments costs money, but also the test process is really key for us. So improve the efficiency of your test process, which means potentially doing less testing. You're potentially getting things to market quicker. You're potentially getting, because you're maintaining the effectiveness as well as maintaining the efficiency, you're effectively saying we're not going to have as many problems in live, so we've got happier customers, less cost in terms of fixing defects in live, etc. So I think that's where it comes in. And as I said at the start, a lot of what I've discussed, if not most of it, is not new. We're just saying this is all good stuff to do, and it's double good if you start looking at it in through that carbon lens and through that green perspective. I don't know if that answers your question. I hope so.
Yeah, absolutely. Thank you.
Thanks.
Yeah, hi Simon. I had a question.
Yeah.
I've got to admit, this is kind of quite interesting. I
Good.
appreciate it. It is something that's obviously becoming more of an important thing for corporations and whatnot.
Yeah.
And the fact that you can have this linked in directly with what I guess we do day to day is even more, I guess, insightful. I guess that link that you talk about relating to kind of risk-based approach of, effectively, do you need to consider testing less?
Yeah.
To, not only save you money, but also obviously contribute towards the sustainability factors. I think potentially massive, because often it might be that you might end up purchasing hardware, for example, and the cost is all burned up front, and you might end up where it's like, okay, well, we've got all these machines sitting here which have already been paid for as well, so you're not in essence, I guess, in the hardware model going to necessarily save any more money, maybe on electricity, but I guess this is where it's then routing through to, it could make a difference for sustainability. But now we're kind of starting to move more into cloud, and you start to talk about the measurements of kind of people understanding this a little bit more. It's really interesting. But I guess my question related to, I guess, the active, when those discussions are first starting, when you started to test, let's say, some new features in a product that are going in, one of the core aspects of, I guess, testing is making sure that attributes of quality are kind of discussed around a product. And I think it's interesting, given that this could potentially come into that conversation where it's like, what can we actually do within a product to make it more sustainable, and to perhaps put a few boundaries around that, so developers and product managers can think about that up front as well.
Yeah, I must admit, I haven't spoken about that in here, so I'm trying. It is something we've considered. So, like you say, traditionally we'll look at things like usability, accessibility, maintainability, portability, etc., and they're all quality attributes that are well known and people test for a lot. Sustainability is not so much. So that's a whole different thing. So there's thousands of pages worth of research around there around greener coding, for example, to use less resources actually in the running of the code, and I'm sure you're right. I'm sure that quality attribute will come into testing more and more over the coming years. I've talked here deliberately really about how we can try and minimize our carbon footprint while we're carrying out testing, rather than looking at the aspect of minimizing the carbon footprint of the final product. But you're absolutely right. There's going to be an awful lot of interest in that area as well coming through. That there already is, but it's going to become more and more.
Sure, cool. Thank you.
I'm not sure if you saw. There was also another question in the chat, so I'll just read that one out. So, is there a reason that the real uptake or the focus that you've had has been on banks so far, or do you have an idea of like what other industries are set to gain the most from sustainable testing?
Yeah, it's an interesting question. I mean, the honest answer to why banks so far is because they're the ones that we're finding are taking interest. And I don't know whether that's down to individuals or, because they are typically very large organizations. And if you think back to that ESG diagram, they've typically got people involved in, looking at that ESG aspect and making sure things happen. And as I said, this is really part of that. So there's no, other than that, I don't think there's any particular reason why it's financial institutions. And I think, we are going to try and widen that out within that greener software testing. What's it called? The greener software testing community. There's no intention on the part of anybody involved in that, I don't believe, to now limit that to banks or financial institutions. It's open to everybody. I think, as far as we're concerned, these considerations should be taken into consideration by everybody in every industry. Obviously, as I said, everybody will have their own challenges. So, banks have their own challenges around audit and keeping records for audit purposes in terms of that housekeeping we spoke about. But there's other industries that might, healthcare, etc., that might actually need to do really exhaustive testings for really good risk-based reasons. So, as I said, no two industries will be the same, but I think they can all start looking at this and thinking about this. The fact that we've spoken about banks mostly is really just an accident of where we are in the conversation at the moment. It's not a deliberate attempt to bracket this into one industry.
Okay, and so I also did have one question. I'd like to understand. So, if your organisations don't already have business-wide objectives for sustainability, what's the best way you would suggest holding your organisation accountable in a constructive way?
Yeah, so it's an interesting question. So I think if you're not getting that top-down approach, it's a little bit more difficult, I think. But I think it's as I said, it's about having those conversations, not just within testing, but people within testing will talk to other people, at various levels of the organisation, and start having that conversation at all levels of the organisation and try and escalate it upwards. I think most organisations, to be fair, will take this on board if they haven't already, because many have already. Let's be fair. But start having those conversations and start talking. Talk about this, and say, we went to this amazing presentation the other day and they spoke about this, and say, what are we doing about that in our organisation, and see what people say. I think it's planting the seed and hoping that people take interest. I think people will take it on board very soon, and I'd be surprised if there's many organisations out there that aren't at least thinking about this. And actually, if the management see that people are actually, people doing the work are actually interested in this, perhaps that gives them an incentive to do something at that top level and start cascading it down.
Brilliant, thank you. Now, if anybody else hasn't got any further questions, I think I'm happy to say sort of thank you so much for that talk, Simon. It's really insightful, beneficial. I hope everybody enjoyed it. So what I will be doing now is just dropping into the chat the link. So if anybody did join late, or for whatever reasons had to nip off or dart out, we have also recorded this, so you'll be able to view this on our IO meetups page, which I've just shared in the chat now. You'll also be able to see loads of different other meetups that we get involved with, and you'll be able to sort of keep up to date with the testing series as we continue to progress. Great. Well, look, I'd like to thank everybody for their time. Thank you again, Simon. Really appreciate it. And have a great evening all. Take care.
Thanks all. Have a good evening. Thank you very much.
Bye.
Bye.
Thank you.